Way back in my Spirited Away miniature video, I said this. This is probably the most beautiful space in any Ghibli movie. I said it. And so here we are. This is a project that has been on my list since then, literal years. Before we get started, if you have not seen Miss Minnie Life's version of Howl's Bedroom that she did a while ago, highly, highly, highly recommend go watch it because it is amazing, and I will leave a link for it in the description. Also, Studson has literally made every single version of the exterior of the castle, so if you have not seen any of those, I would highly recommend them. Now you may have noticed, but it has been a very long time. Midway through, I got cursed by the Witch of the Waste and fell ill for a number of days. But hopefully it will be worth the wait.
Here's another curse. May all your bacon burn.
As with all the other Ghibli Cookie Tin projects, I decided that I needed to paint the space. I don't know why I do this to myself. But to be honest, if there is one to paint, it would definitely be this one because it is so complicated. It helps me a lot when I'm going about starting to make it. If I were to make one of those video essays on Howl's Moving Castle, I think I would probably title it Magic in the Movement. Granted, I think that really applies to almost every Ghibli movie, but I just really think it's a huge part of Howl's Moving Castle. Every single character and piece of scenery has such a specific and unique way of moving that really adds to their character, and I think that's something that is a lot of the times overlooked. The way characters move really does say a lot about their personality and who they are, and I just feel like that is something Ghibli movies get so right. Even the side characters have magic in their movement. Even the chairs. There's just such magic in these little details in the animation that make it so beautiful. So as always, starting with the base. I am super passionate about every single project that I do, but the amount of passion for this one is unparalleled. I actually got this tin maybe 2 years ago, and I was like, this is the tin that I'm gonna build Howl's bedroom in one day. It was a great time to get some lights. These were about 80 cents after Christmas. The first thing that I need to do is see how much space I'm gonna need to run these along the outside. Since the tin was that royal blue color, I wanted to make the outside of it a scene with the star people that are in several scenes in the movie. So I thought it would be really cool to thread lights through the inside and create a border so that the heads of the stars could light up. To prepare for that, I started off by making holes in the tin for where the heads would go. Then I started painting on the scene with all the star people. So just painting on their little bodies, painting on the color colorful pieces coming off their heads. I added in white paper on the inside to be their heads, and I also painted Howl at the very top in the center with his heart in his hands as best as I could. I'm literally just stealing this directly off the cover of the movie. And finally painting on some little stars in the rest of the background to fill in some of the negative space. To run the lights along the inside edge of the tin, I needed to make a frame that would go around the border. I'm making that out of paperboard from a pizza box.
I'll tell you how to recycle. Make it into a project.
I wanted to make the border a little bit more interesting, so I drew designs that I thought would kind of go with the movie, and some of the light would come through as well. And I just thought it would add a little decorative element and have a storybook feel. I painted that border piece brown to look a little bit like old wood and Mod Podged it. And then I'm doing the same thing as with the star heads and adding paper on the inside to color the light in each of those little cut out icon areas. I also added a clear window at the top of the border so that some of the light would come through and cast on the project. And then I covered the inside of that with paperboard to make it nice and clean. And then we needed to cut a hole in the back for where the door will go. So I'm going in with my trusty Dremel.
She likes my spark!
And that was as far as I got before I realized I should probably be doing this outside. So I taped around those edges to make sure that they were safe and not sharp. And then I cut a hole in the back wall paperboard where the door will go. I attached that back wall piece on, and then I'm going in with some joint compound to seal all of the edges where these pieces meet and just clean everything up. Then we have a nice clean base to work with, and we can start the interior. I'm starting by working on the floor. I painted the base black first, and then I created some wood pieces out of paperboard to be the flooring. Now obviously, because it's Howl's room, you're not gonna see very much of the floor anyway in the end, but I glued those pieces in, then Mod Podged over top of that to again give it that finished wood feeling. And then we're starting work on the door. The door is slightly dimensional, of course, so I'm cutting a piece of craft foam and laying it on top of a piece of paperboard, making the slanted pieces up to the outside of the door to finish all of that off. I painted the door brown to look like wood, and then I am creating the door handle with some paperboard and part of a toothpick. Because of the shape of the tin, I am putting the door handle on the opposite side as it would be in the movie in order to be able to open with the slant of the tin. Mod Podged the door again, as I did with everything that is wood in this project. I'm using a very similar method with a combination of craft foam and paperboard to make the table next to the door. I painted that in a very, very similar manner to all the other wood pieces, and then started painting the wallpaper. It's actually really hard to tell exactly what is on the walls, but I do believe most of the walls have this floralish green and gold wallpaper. I also liked that the most as well, so we're just gonna paint the whole thing that. So I painted the walls green, and then to do the gold, I painted all of the florally pieces in yellow first, and then went over top with gold metallic paint. That meant that I had to paint this twice.
I gotta be honest, painting it the first time, fun. Painting it the second time, not so fun. This is gold paint, so it is metallic. A lot of that's probably gonna get covered up, but
in my Arietti cookie tin, I did a day and night window. I thought that concept would be so perfect for this with the magical door that changes locations. I'm going to be putting that in Howl's room. I know that it's not, but it's magic. We can make our own rules. So I'm basically using that same sliding mechanism as I did in my Arietti project to make 4 different locations to go behind the door. Sliding mechanism is basically just a rectangle box with 4 dividers inside, so I can slot each location card into the slider. I painted all of that blue to go with the tin and just glued it on to the back. I made frames for all the different locations and painted them with the color that corresponds on the spinner. there. I grabbed 4 different stills of the different locations that I liked and attached them to sliders that I can just switch out as the door changes locations. Then we had to start the bookshelf, which is probably the most complicated big furniture piece that I am making in this. I again am using a combination of paperboard and craft foam. I use this combination to create different thicknesses of pieces. So for example, some of the outside walls are paperboard and the back is paperboard to really save on the width space because we don't have a lot in the tin. Now this bookshelf has very decorative borders, so I'm using these beads that have a pretty cool shaped piece that's a little bit similar to what is on the bookshelf. My neighbors know I'm a trash goblin and they gave these to me to use in my projects. For the side columns, I am using pieces of a straw to make the cylindrical pieces. The shelves need to be thicker, so I'm using craft foam for that. I'm creating some of the more complicated shaped borders out of paperboard, and then the very top of the bookshelf has a sort of eye looking piece. So I'm making the dimension of that eye piece with puffy paint, and then finishing everything off with a round wooden bead at the very top. I was just gonna set it away to dry, and I put my finger in the eye. Thank you for coming to my poetry reading.
What a mess!
I'm again painting everything brown to look like wood, adding some additional puffy paint details later to some borders and things like that. Then I'm making the door frame. I'm making it out of craft foam, and it's a little bit decorative. Went in with puffy paint again to draw on some subtle dimensional details, and then painting it to look like wood again, Mod Podging. You know the deal by now. There is a decorative eye piece on the door. So to create that, I am using part of a milk bottle tab to be the middle of the eye because it's slightly curved. Then I'm going around that with puffy paint and just trying to create the outside decorative border. Then I'm painting the eye.
When you're standing on the edge, so young and hopeless, got demons in your head. We are.
To create the swirly question mark piece that's on the bottom, I coated some yarn in glue and let it dry in that shape. I'm assembling all that and then placing it onto the door. Finally, I am writing a little note on some scrap of tea-dyed paper from some of my other projects and then just sticking that on the door. Our project challenge over on Patreon for December was snow globes, so I decided that I would include one in this. So I made a miniature one. I was trying to figure out for a long time how I would make the dome part as I was having some berries one day. I noticed on the container kind of dome-like pieces that close the container. So I'm using that. I made the inside a star because I thought that it would be pretty fitting for his room. And then I used some glitter to make the snow coming down on the inside. And we had our little snow globe done. I needed a ton of books for this project. I thought it would be really cool if I could include the patrons in this project. So I decided that I would create a book with everyone's names on them. So I designed, I think, 84-ish. This took me such a long time. Obviously, you're not gonna see the cover of every single book in the end, but you're all in there. At least you and me know. So I printed the books out, cut everything out, and then it was time for our very long book assembly process. I'm just putting craft foam on the inside because it was a good thickness. I had planned everything out for all the books to fit really well on the bookshelf. I did also make some extra tall books that are going on the top shelves because there's some bigger ones up there, and those are just a little bit thicker, so I am using foam core on the inside of those. I've got a pile of mini books.
Will it be enough? I don't know. I do love how they turned out though. I think they're really cool.
I also made a couple of plain ones with some little papers sticking out. Since I spent so much time designing these books, I am going to offer them to you. So I'm gonna put a JPEG of all of them in the description, and I'm also going to include the editable Photoshop document over on Patreon in case anyone wants to resize them and include some books in a project. I started placing the books onto the bookshelf, trying to match the one in the movie as best as I could, but also I just wanted it to look cool.
I've had enough of this.
I'm sneaking the snow globe onto one of the shelves on the bookshelf. I'm replacing some books that are there, but we got enough books in this room. Then I had to make some various other objects to go on the bookshelf. I decided to just kind of paint these two-dimensionally because it was a little bit easier. To a certain extent, I am doing parts of this kind of in 2.5D because we're working with that very small width in the tin. So I painted some potion bottles, some shell pieces, and started placing all those extra pieces onto the bookshelf. For this project, something that was really, really important was getting that glitzy, magical shine. So I did get some gemstone sticker things from the dollar store that I thought would work really well. I'm using those to create this little shiny kind of piece that's coming off the bookshelf. I just wrapped a bunch of wire pieces together and then put gemstones on the end of those. Then I am creating Howl's bedside table. There's not going to be a bed because we don't have the space for that. But there's only like one shot that really shows this at all, but it does have a really cool patterned tablecloth over it, so I'm just painting that pattern on a scrap of green fabric that I had. It's kind of a floral pattern with swirly sun pieces. I made the table real quick and dirty, so it's quite ugly under that tablecloth.
It's hideous!
I just made it out of a piece of cardboard and some little wooden legs. This table is going on the diagonal part of the cookie tin, so one of the legs is a little bit shorter than the other one to accommodate for that. I'm also making a couple of tiny little props to go on top of the table, some little letters, and I also placed a couple of books on it as well. For this project, I finally got some real mini hinges to use on the door. I use hinges in a lot of my projects, but I've just been making paper ones for a really long time. So I'm attaching the hinges and then attaching the door onto that so it can open and close. And then the door frame is going to go over that hinge. And then finally, we can put in all of our large furniture pieces. Then we're starting on all of our props. Howl, like me, is a big fan of props. Although, am I still after this project? I don't know. So I started by making the little pendulum clock-like thing with the eye piece out of paperboard. Again, I am painting most of it, built up the shape, and then I started using some yarn to make the details on this. I also used some puffy paint to make the top detail piece with the little person-like figure. Now also on the table there is this kind of gramophone looking thing. I made the base piece of that with craft foam and a piece of foam core. And then I'm making the sound hole out of a bead and some masking tape to fill in the big gaps on that bead. I painted that yellow and then gold, of course, and then attached the pieces together. Then I'm making some little pieces that are over on the table next to the door. So there are some long scroll pieces that are coming out of this dragon figure's mouth. The side has these red zigzaggy kind of pieces. I happen to have a scrap of red fabric that was already cut in zigzags on the side. I don't know why. I wasn't the one that cut it, but it worked perfectly for this. And then I'm using some of the same green fabric that I used earlier for the tablecloth and just painted on the design and glued everything together. I did also layer them on paperboard so that I could shape it a little bit easier.
The danger of using paperboard packaging is, now I want pizza.
I need some breakfast. I'm starved.
There's also one above it that has some little designs of a ship and things like that, so I did that in a very similar manner. Later I did notice that there was a little frog piece on the door, so I did make that out of puffy paint as well. Then we have to create the sort of magical floating orb, and I can't make it an actual sphere because again, we don't have the width in the tin. I didn't have any ideas on how to actually make it a sphere, so this worked out in our favor. I drew the back and front shapes out and cut them from paperboard, and then putting some pink and green gemstones on in the places where all of the frames meet. Then I'm using a piece of plastic packaging to create the inside magical sort of light. I'm using a mixture of Mod Podge and watercolor to kind of try and make that colored radial gradient. Then I'm gluing that all together like a sandwich or a sand wizard. Then I started making the door spinner for the different locations. So a circle with 4 sections in yellow, green, red, and black. I cut the arrow out of cardstock so that I could bend it into the shape that it needed to be. I'm making the whole spinner piece kind of like a paper fastener, but just with cardstock so that it can spin. Honestly, I didn't do this super well, but it does kind of spin enough for me to move it, so that's good enough for me.
Why do I feel like this is not going to work?
Then I'm making this little gold, sparkly, magical thing. I don't know what it is, but I love it. So I'm using 2 little rings from milk bottle tabs again, and I'm just kind of attaching them together. And then I'm cutting out some different shaped pieces, painting everything gold, and attaching the gemstones onto them. And then everything gets attached into the ring. I also needed to make a pot of different glass scepter things. So I'm making those out of 2 different beads that I had that looked like a fancy decorative pot. And the scepters are pieces of glue that have dripped out of my hot glue gun. Real magical. I'm again painting them with some Mod Podge mixed with teal watercolor to hopefully keep some of the transparency, although there wasn't much to begin with. Then I'm starting to make some of the big decorative pieces that are hanging from the ceiling, of which there are so many. You may not have noticed if you haven't sat there and studied this room, but there is, in fact, a moon with a face on it in his room, which means, of course, that this project was destiny for me. So I'm making the sun and moon with faces with paperboard and then using puffy paint to add dimension, like so many pieces in this project. Then I'm painting the sun and the moon pieces. Honestly, I feel like the sun's face turned out a lot creepier than it was in the movie, but is that really a surprise? Then I'm making the pendant piece that is hanging down from the ceiling. Again, paperboard and puffy paint. And I also included a red gemstone piece in the center, painting a couple of seashell beads to match the color scheme. I'm also painting a bead to make it into the little charm that is hanging from the bookshelf, adding some gemstones and sparkly bits on it as well, and then adding a tassel to the bottom that I made from a frayed piece of ribbon. I made as many of the main prop pieces as I could, but we can only go so far, you know? So I'm just painting some objects that I already had that I thought would go really well in the room, like these stars from the lights that I used in the Nightmare Before Christmas project. I'm also stealing a snake from my Halloween project a couple years ago, threading some beads onto some yarn. I did make quite a few of the charms off camera. We would have been here for days. I was there for days. So I'm gonna save you that pain and we'll move on to some other pain, which is sculpting. Starting with the 2 squid pieces near the door. Created the squid shape out of Sculpey, and then I'm drawing on some line texture all the way down it and adding some dotted texture with a mechanical pencil. I'm creating the tentacles with some really thin little pieces of clay, blending them on the bottom as best as I can, and cutting them to the length that I want them to be. Honestly, they turned out probably better than I expected, so that's all I can ask for. I'm also making the hanging sword as well. So I cut out the handguard piece and then just threading a wire through everything to keep it in the right curved shape. Of course, I went in and used some isopropyl alcohol, smoothing everything out a little bit. And then, of course, everything gets baked. We have to paint our sculpted pieces. So I went in and painted the squids, the sword, the dagger, our cool little dragon creature, and also our jug.
Even though I'm going through it and it makes you feel alone, just know that I would die for you. Come a little closer, baby. There's no one
finish off the squids, I needed to make the little tags. I used, again, some tea-dyed paper, laid that on top of the same red fabric that I used for the zigzag pieces earlier. I'm using half white and half red thread on each side and tying a little bow and just trimming it and making it the right size. I say the right size, but honestly, this whole tag section was a little bit bigger than it was supposed to be, so maybe not the right size. Then, of course, I wanted to make the picture frame with the dartboard and the note. Now again, since the cookie tin is very thin, we don't have room on the wall for the entire picture. So I'm basically just making half of it. I created the picture frame with paperboard and then used yarn to create the borders. And then to add on the decorative pieces, I am again going in with our trusty puffy paint. I painted on some kind of painting that looked similar-ish to what was in the movie, and also painting on the dartboard, using a scrap of tea-dyed paper, creating the letter that will go onto the dartboard. In true Howl fashion, it is being held up by a dagger.
Such drama.
So I started making that out of paperboard and just stabbed it through the letter. I am making some little pink and purple flower pieces on the right side of the bookshelf, like I have done in quite a few different miniatures now. Using tissue paper, dipping it into some water that has been dyed with watercolor, and then scrunching it up and letting it dry into that shape. Does it look perfectly like flowers? Maybe not, but as always, it's close enough for me. Then there is that big eye origami charm, as I like to call it. It has some kind of yellow origami looking pieces hanging from it. They could just be beads, and it has a bunch of eyes at the top as well. Most of the design is just getting painted on, and then I'm adding a little bit of dimension in the eyes and things with some puffy paint, and then painting on all of the details. It's Howl's room, so it's gotta be glitzy. To create the bottom pieces that are hanging down, I'm using some leftover miniature popcorn that I made in my BTS Lights music video in the same method that I did the flowers, just with the scrunched up tissue paper. I'm threading 7 of those pieces onto a piece of thread. I did go in and paint them a little bit darker yellow. Since there's so much going on in Howl's room, I do feel like I need to have a focal point. So I did want to make a little figure of Howl. I have a bunch of figures left over from a music video that I worked on, so I decided I would try to make one of them into Howl. You know I'm not about to sit here and sculpt Howl at that scale. So I started by sanding down the parts that I wanted to change the shape of, filed down some areas as well. The file really came in handy to get into those super tiny spots. Then I started building up some areas to change the shape with joint compound. Is this the best solution? Probably not, but it did work pretty well for me, so just making the hair the right shape and length and bulking out the sleeves to make his wonderful puffy sleeved shirt.
I don't know if it looks like a disaster to everyone, but I'm actually starting to feel like this might be okay. I think this actually might kind of look like Howl. I think Howl might have some opinions on that.
I give up. I see no point in living if I can't be beautiful.
I also filed down parts of the feet to create Howl's heeled shoes, and then we had a pretty decent base to work off of. Painting the shirt white, his shoes black, and making his little outfit. I wanted to make him as he shows up in his room, so it's after his meltdown, which means the dark blue-black hair. The face is always the hardest part to get right, and honestly, I don't really know that I did get it right. I feel like every time I paint eyes on a figure, it just doesn't really look right. Then it is time for final assembly. After many months and many hours working on this, here is Howl's bedroom. This is definitely the most complicated interior that I've done thus far. I'm really glad that I waited a long time to do this project. I hopefully did it a little bit more justice now than I would have a few years ago. I do actually have a plan for the lid of the tin, so that will hopefully be coming at some point as well. As you might know, I did break my old camera back in November. I am currently loaning the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera to see if it would be a good replacement for my old camera, and I did film this entire video on it, so I am really curious to know what you thought. Did it look different? Did it look better? Hopefully. Let me know. February's project challenge over on Patreon was building in an unconventional space. Everyone over on Patreon is just so talented. It just makes me so happy to see everyone's art. If you have a Ghibli project that you've done that you would like to share with me, please do. In the bonus video over on Patreon, I will be talking about me doing a little bit of a workspace upgrade. Everything that I have been doing recently to make the channel better is all supported by the community. It is because of all of you watching that I can even start trying to improve the quality of the videos, and I am just so beyond grateful. Hope you enjoyed, and let me know who your favorite character is in Howl's Moving Castle.